What's the curve for this test?
I will not know until I've graded yours. Oops, I mean, until I've graded everybody's. Okay. No, I mean, it depends on, well, I wind up deciding on a curve when I look at the scores. And I try to get a curve that achieves a reasonable amount of A's and a reasonable amount of B's and a reasonable amount of C's. And those of you who don't keep up with your classmates, unfortunately, are going to fail. You have to get within 40 points of the top score. Actually, farther than that. I put a really lenient curve on it for this class. All right, any other questions? All right. We left off last time with the Russian Revolution. Strange, I don't know how many of you keep up with the news, and I do try to stay away from current events, but the Crimea is making big news. Well, guess what? About a month ago, we were talking about the Crimean War, fought for the same reasons, Russia trying to get a warm water port. Britain prevented it. In 1853, Britain prevented it. Today, Great Britain is not around to prevent it. And it looks like the United States is not going to be able to prevent it either. So Russia's going to have its warm water port. Anyway, back to 1917.
This is chapter 23.
Chapter 23, still, yes. I'm looking at page 681. The communists were able to take over even though they never had, and during the 70 years that the communists ruled Russia, they never had more than 2% of the Russian people were communist. No more than 2%. How they do it? Through sheer utter ruthlessness, through a well-disciplined army. Well, they got their soldiers in line. They said anyone who deserts is going to be executed. And I was in the Army doing basic training, and we'd have people desert about every second week or so. In Lenin's army, they had been executed. Persons who disobeyed orders, again, executed. But they brought order, some kind of order to the army, which was lacking. Under the Tsar, Russian troops would oftentimes fraternize with German troops on the front line between shooting at each other. They get to fraternize. That's just a complete, total breakdown of discipline. Anyway, I remember the Red Army. The red was the Bolshevik. The color red became associated with communism and has been to this day, whether it be communism in Cuba, communism in China, communism in Russia, or communism throughout Eastern Europe. The color red was associated with the communists. Now, during the time that the Bolsheviks were taking over, several nations sent their troops into Russia. The United States included. The United States sent troops into Russia. Great Britain did. France did. And folk, this is something that was almost unprecedented history for that time, but it's something that we have done it with the Russians ever since. The troops sent into Russia did absolutely nothing. Sat there, observed for a while, and then they were called home, having accomplished nothing, having done absolutely nothing. And again, that kind of precedent is the law, the way that we have dealt with communist Russia from that time till this. All right, in 1918, the first American troops arrived, and they began to turn the tide of the battle. Our general, General Pershing, initially said, I want 1 million men by May 1918. You know, and Washington was suspicious. 1 million men, well, that's more than Grant ever had, more than Lee ever had, 150 times more men than George Washington ever had under his command. 1 million men, he wound up getting 2 million, as the government realized that 1 million men might not be quite enough. But 2 million troops were sent. The Germans made a desperate attempt to get the war over with really fast, so they made a big, large offensive that initially looked like it was going to succeed. But in fact, there's a famous saying that the French, as they were retreating, they bumped into an American regiment and they said, turn back, we've lost. And the Americans said, oh, we're not turning back, we just got here. So the Germans ran pell-mell into the Americans who were waiting for them. The Americans stopped the German advance. And late in September, the German High Command informed the government that, hey, we can't win this war. But the Allies refused to let Germany surrender until they had gotten rid of the Kaiser. So the Kaiser abdicated. And on November 11th, 1918, the armistice was signed. Now this is one day I remember because we still celebrate it, folks. It's called Armistice Day. It used to be, I'll put it this way, it used to be called Armistice Day, to remember the armistice. Today it's called Veterans Day, to honor our vets. And persons who have served can go to some restaurants and get a free meal or a meal at a great reduced price on this day. Some of you might know a little bit about what I'm talking about if you have a father who served or something like that. Yes?
I'm a veteran.
You're a veteran? Yeah, well, I am too. And I can show my DD 214 and get a free meal at a really, really nice restaurant on that day. I mean, that's not all of it. On November 11th, of course, the post offices will close. The banks will close. All government, state, and federal offices will close. It is still a federal holiday, and there'll be write-ups in the paper about how our people in service have protected us down through the years. So it was signed on the 11th month, the 11th day of the month, at 11 o'clock in the morning. The 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, but the year was 1918. I'll always remember that day for personal reason. My grandfather, whose name also was John Cunningham, was on his way to the front. And he was to arrive at the front on November 12th. On November 11th, he was told he could stop his march to the front. The war was over. You might think, well, he didn't contribute much. Actually, it was a big contribution because the fact that he and tens, hundreds of thousands of other troops from America were on their way did in fact make the German High Command decide, yes, we have to surrender. We can't handle the 2 million men that they've already sent over here. And even if we could, well, hey, they could just send 2 million more and then 2 million more after that. So the fact that he was on the way was a service to his country, and he almost got to the front lines. His brother, my great Uncle Sam, I sound like Uncle Sam, very American name, but he saw some combat. But he came home and wouldn't talk about it, which so many soldiers are like that. And a lot of experts are now saying that's the worst way in the world to deal with the problem, is to just refuse to talk about it. But he was one of those. He wouldn't tell what had happened to him or what he'd done. Anyway, the war ended, and the nations, the victorious nations, got together to form a peace treaty. And the big three, well, your book shows them, the big four. The big four were the heads of state for the United States, France, Great Britain, and Italy. But Italy did not feel welcome, so Italy pulled out and it became the big three. The book shows a picture of the big four there in Paris. They met at Paris, and the American president, Woodrow Wilson, became the first president to cross the ocean while he was president. Left the country, went across the Atlantic. The first president to do so, another one, Theodore Roosevelt, had gone down to Panama one time to see the opening of the canal, but he was the first one to actually cross seas to take care of America's interests abroad. Now, the Treaty of Versailles was what they came up with. They was signed in the same palace that King Louis XIV had built in the 1600s. The palace is still standing. Germany was not invited to participate. The terms of the treaty were especially harsh for Germany. There was the infamous Article 231 when it said Germany was to blame. Blamed the entire cause of the war on Germany. And again, this really, most historians today say this was really very unfair, because while Germany could have done a little bit more to prevent the war, they were not the sole blame. But in addition to that, Germany was required to pay a huge reparation. In other words, they were saying, Germany, since you started a war and since you did so much damage, you need to bear the cost of the war. Now, this proved to be a very, very fatal blunder that had two big bad repercussions. The two repercussions were the Great Depression that occurred about 10 years later, and the other repercussion was the war that occurred 10 years beyond that. In fact, one French general looked at the treaty and said, well, this is not a peace treaty. This is merely a 20-year truce. How true he was. Because 20 years after this was signed, Treaty of Versailles, Europe was at war again. Now, what was wrong with the reparation? All right, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. At the end of World War II, after we had defeated Germany and Japan, we went in and rebuilt both countries. There hasn't been a major war with them since. If we had gone in after World War I and tried to get Germany to help rebuild Germany, there might not have been a World War II. What we did by forcing Germany to take a big chunk of its wealth and give to the Allies was basically take Germany out of the economic, I'm going to call it economic circulation game. All right, here's the way it works, folks. Circulation. Circulation is where you get your paycheck on Friday, and most of it is gone by Saturday. All right. Some of you seem to be familiar with that, but it's just you have it. I mean, you get your money. So basically, here's how it works. Supposing I only have $100, and I want to give each of you $100. So I start off here and give this person who in turn pass it to this person who in turn pass it down. And each of you, I mean, you exchange $100 for good, there's some good in service. So you have some good in service that benefits someone else, so you get the $100, and in turn you pay the $100 to the next person. And all this $100 circulates all the way around until everybody gets a share at one point or another. It's called circulation. The circulation stops when you take a certain player out of the game. And folks, the world economy cannot afford to take a player the size of Germany out of the economic game. And when Germany's economy failed, I'm jumping ahead of the story just a little bit. When Germany's economy failed, it brought the economy of the whole world crashing down with it. Huge mistake. Nevertheless, they signed it. Now, with all due respect, our own American president, President Woodrow Wilson, was against this. He was against assigning Germany blame, but the leaders of Britain and France said, hey, you were not involved as long as we were, so you don't know how much, and in effect, they didn't say it in so many words, but you don't know how much hatred we have and how much suffering we've done and how terrible the costs have been. You just lost 50,000 of your men, nothing to compare with the almost 2 million men that France lost and 900,000 men that Britain lost. Not to mention what Russia had lost, even though Russia was not invited to participate. They said, in fact, you don't know how terribly we've had it over here. So they didn't pay that much attention to our President Woodrow Wilson. Now, I must say this about Woodrow Wilson. To understand what happened next, you have to understand the personality of the man. Woodrow Wilson is the only president we've had who had a PhD. He towered that way intellectually above his fellows around him. He was always, he was the son of a Southern preacher. I'm not going to call out the name of the denomination, but he and I have a few things in common, even though I don't have a PhD, but I had dreams of getting one time. But he had a father who was always criticizing him, always belittling him. So he developed what we used to call an inferiority complex. Today we call it a low self-image. To make up for his feelings of inadequacy, he tried hard to achieve. Now, sometimes a father like that will break a man. Sometimes he'll push that man into achieving highly to make up for his feelings of inferiority. Woodrow Wilson liked to get in front of a crowd because he felt power, and he liked to lead. Well, Woodrow Wilson became president of Princeton University. I mean, you know, one of the Ivy League schools. Now, folk, I had a 4th grade teacher who told us young kids, now see what you can do if you set your mind to it. I don't think so. You can't do just anything. All right. If you disagree with me, you can say so. But I don't believe you can just do any old thing you set your mind to. You have your limitations. Each of us has a limitation. In his case, he had the mental ability, the mental acumen. He got to be president of Princeton. As president of Princeton, though, he didn't get along with the faculty because he wanted to change and they wanted to keep things as they were. They elected him governor of New Jersey, and as governor, he again had this problem. He wanted to change, and they wanted to keep things the same. In 1912, the Democratic Party saw they had a chance to win the presidential election. They had to pick now, who can we pick, who can win for us? And even as long ago as 1912, they had a hard time finding someone of them who wasn't thoroughly corrupt. But they finally said, hey, I know, we can pick the governor of New Jersey, Woodrow Wilson. They thought they had a chance to win because they knew the Republicans were going to split their vote between Roosevelt and Taft. So Wilson was able to win the election with only 40% of the vote, but again, it was because the Republicans split their vote between two men. So Wilson won the election. And they thought, once in power, we can control him. And instead, once he got to be president, he ran the country his way. I mean, he was a very, very religious man, but he also was an evolutionist. And he believed it was his duty to propel man to the next high level of evolution. There was a lower level was tribalism. Then the next level up was kings, monarchy. The next level up was democracy, where America was now. Well, the next level beyond democracy, in his eyes, was socialism. He was socialistic, largely, even though officially he was a Democrat, but largely he was socialistic. But he began to get the reforms through the country that set the stage for the socialism that we're experiencing now. A lot of it has the beginnings with him. He had contempt for ordinary people, and here's where this cost my generation. When he was in France, your book showed a picture of him in France, your book does not show the picture of him. Some Vietnamese bellboy came up to him and said, Mr. Wilson, I'd like for you to listen to me. I'd like for you to help me get my country independent of France. Woodrow Wilson, Vietnamese bellboy, and brushed him aside. This Vietnamese bellboy turned out to be Ho Chi Minh. Have any ever heard the story? Yeah, Ho Chi Minh. And that little mistake on Wilson's part cost my generation 50,000 men, because Ho Chi Minh then went to Lenin, and Lenin listened to him. He went to Stalin, and Stalin listened to him. Ho Chi Minh was to lead the Vietnamese to independence, and even lead the Vietnamese to victory against the United States later, which we will be talking about before the semester's out. Again, if Wilson could have just taken time to at least listen to him, he couldn't have given them independence from France right then, but at least he could have showed he cared. He didn't.